Welcome to another episode of the Profitable Home Services Podcast. I'm your host, Diane Gardner, and I'm so happy that you chose to join us again today. Our guest today is Ben Wright, and he comes to us as a very successful sales trainer. So I know that you probably have some preconceived ideas and you've done a lot of sales training, possibly. But listen up, I'm sure we're going to get some great profit inducing nuggets in today's interview. So, with that, welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Diane. Really appreciate you having me. And I do love the focus on profit that this show takes because that old saying, sales are vanity, profit's sanity, cash flow's reality. If you're not banking profit, there's no point being in business. So it's music to my ears when I jump onto a podcast like this.
Well, good, because I love it when we can show our listeners ways that they can eke out a little bit more out of every sale that they get and drop that money straight to their bottom line profits to where it's not just money that evaporates into the business, but it actually gets held and it gets used and it gets becomes a reward for the owner and a reward for the team and things like that, and it allows them to grow a better business and one that I always say that they fall in love with again. Because too often we grind it out and we don't really love our businesses anymore.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. If you don't
um,
love it, it gets really difficult to stay with it long term, doesn't it?
it does. And I've come across people time and again, they've been grinding it out for years. And once we have that conversation, we can come up with ideas and ways to make it go easier and get them better successes, some quick wins. And all of a sudden it's like, I kind of like this business again now. So, why don't we start out with talk a little bit about different kinds of sales training in a home service industry type business.
Well, that's a super broad question. I like it.
It
I've actually
is.
never been asked that. And to give context, I'm 43, and apologies for my deep, heavy Australian accent. I often get asked to slow down, so I do my best to slow down my speak. But um, as we get in today, I think my job's going to be to find two or three small to medium things that your listeners can immediately impact into their business to make a difference for them. So we're going to run that lens, and I think that's really, really important to say from the start. But when it comes to sales training, gee, it can be varied. And I've certainly seen since COVID the rise and rise and rise of your pocketbook sales trainers. So they're people that have carried the bag a little bit, but jumped in quite heavily to sales training and really lead with a pitch that says, do this one thing and you will change your business and you will reinvent your life or you will fall back in love with your business. And I think my greatest or my strongest feelings around sales training is that it's never one moment. It's a habit. It's a way of life. And I live really heavily around the 1% better theme. So 1% better every day, the atomic habits theme. I've got the book
You bet. I
sitting
love
over
that
there.
concept. Yes.
Yeah, it's a great concept. And I think the businesses, particularly in home services, in trades businesses, construction businesses, right, they're all closely linked, particularly home services and trade. And these businesses, where you take that approach of trying to be a little bit better each and every day, you actually not only get better results because you're consistently applying yourself to it, but also it allows you to improve because, in particular, these style of businesses are just so busy that they don't have the time to go and devote a week to sales training or a day a week for the next 6 weeks or big chunks of time, right? Because these people are typically they're time poor, right? And I mean, think of yourself listening, right? And for me, I owned a quite a successful trade business here. We went from zero to $40 million in revenue in a 7 year period. And we sold out to one of the largest energy retailers in the country. They're about a $10 billion balance sheet. So big David and Goliath type of approach there. But so I've carried the bag and I know these businesses really well from personal experience too. And I put myself back in those shoes in those days when I was just so busy that I didn't have time to reinvent my sales process. However, I learned along the way a number of small things and small changes you can make really regularly and come back to and check really regularly that allowed me to keep lifting the game on my sales processes. So I think to answer that question, really good sales growth rather than training, but sales growth of a person, a business leader, or a team actually comes from having an approach that allows you to keep getting that little bit better each and every day.
I love that. And the listeners may not have thought this through, but when you have, let's say you're working on two or three things and you're just trying to get that 1% better every day, over a 30, a 60, a 90-day time period, you start taking advantage of the compounding effect.
Yeah.
And what you started out is this teeny tiny little change. When you look back at it, like if you're taking a look back over the last quarter or whatever, those changes start to become pretty good, pretty big, and you start seeing the dollars really starting to move.
Uh, Absolutely. And particularly when we talk home services businesses who often have a large number of transactions, and I don't mean hundreds of transactions, right? But they have dozens of transactions over that period. If you change one thing, so for example, I work on a framework I've built called the Core 3 conversion process. It's all about speed, value, and process. If you can fix one part of your sales process from speed, so if you can quote that little bit faster, you can find a way to engage and quote faster because speed matters absolutely. Speed kills in a good way
It
in
does.
the sales industry. But if you can do that once and make that change, you then get to apply that again and again and again to
Yeah.
every single deal that you work with, as well as improving that change. So you get, for me, it's almost a compounded compounding effect that you get to roll out again and again and again. So yeah, absolutely agree with you on that one, Diane.
Yeah. Um, it's always fun from my side of the table because I'm coaching with these guys and I'm watching their sales numbers grow, watching that cost of goods, start to grow. And it seems like it starts off pretty flat. And then all of a sudden, here it goes, and it starts
Yeah.
making a pretty decent curve upwards when all they've concentrated on is a 1% improvement somewhere. And other people go, well, I want to go fast. But sometimes it's better to do those small 1% changes than it is to try to implement something that's a 50% change. Because generally you can't repeat that over and over and over
Mm.
again, but your small 1% changes you can repeat day after day after day after day for years.
Absolutely. And you can also implement them very quickly.
Yes.
It takes a considerable amount of time to make a 50% change to a business. And it's also, I'd argue, quite risky. It can really raise the fears, fears of trepidation, anxiety. What's going to happen if I change this and something goes wrong? Whereas those small changes you can build from. Yeah. So it sounds like we're definitely singing from the same hymn book there.
Yeah. So I'm hoping some of the our listeners have tried those 1% changes. And hopefully some of you guys reach out to us. Tell us your success stories. We always love to hear from you. We love to hear what's working in your business. And then we can share that on out with other listeners on our platform. So, Ben, what's an area where somebody should actually start if they're going to make a series of a couple small changes?
It's interesting. I was sitting there for a moment thinking, okay, if I'm the listener right now, what am I thinking? And I was sitting there thinking, tell me, Ben, don't tell me what some of these 1% changes are. So
Yes,
I'm
what
glad
are
you
they?
asked it. Otherwise, we would have forced that in somehow. Okay, so I'll use an example. So I work with a painting business. So it's a great home services business. He has fire in his belly. He's a younger guy. When he came to me about 16 months ago, his business was okay. It was profitable. He had a modest wage. He was working himself into the ground, but he really had a hunger to grow. And we went about making some small changes, some repeatable changes. And when I say he was working himself into the ground, he was working that kind of 80, 90 hour weeks, which
Oh, those are hard.
yeah, they're big.
Yeah.
And I experienced them. I probably ran 6 or 7 years at 80 to 90 hours, but it was very much worth it because we were growing. I mean, from 0 to 40 million revenue a year is a great growth curve. So I could really empathize with him around just how busy he was. So we set about making some changes. And the things that this business did, and this gentleman's name's Will, is we sat down and the first thing we did was improve his lead to conversion speed. So all about how fast he responds to leads. And I
Okay.
will say as I go through this, I'd expect that a number of these, if you're listening, you go, I know it. And I'm really big on nailing the basics rather than trying to hit the highest peaks that you can. We get those basics right because almost every business I work with, and when I say almost every business I work with needs to work on the basics to be able to grow the profit at the bottom line. So what we did was worked on speed. So how quickly he contacted leads, how quickly he quoted, and in a lot of instances, being able to quote on the spot, and how he followed up with those customers. So, how quickly he followed up. So, speed, lots of little changes around speed. Now, this is over a 16-month period. So, we're able to tick off quite a few one percenters. The second thing that we looked at was value. So, how we made sure that Will, whenever he met with customers, was worried less about what he can do for them and more about understanding what they wanted. That concept around step into your customer's shoes and then get them to step into the shoes they want to fill. So
Right.
if we step away from a painter at the moment, if it's a cleaning business, right? Let's go down to something like cleaning that can be quite straightforward. But also, if we can layer into why people want their home clean, it's often just more than dust off the floor. It can be because they've had issues with mold. It can be because they have regularly entertained and they want to be proud of their house. Or it can be that they don't entertain because their house is always messy, right? And then by having a cleaner come in, it allows them to have a home that they're proud of or set the right example for their children. Or all right, and yes, you can draw the bow as far as you like here, but what we did with Will was to find out exactly what was important to his customers around the painting, and then focus on aligning what he offered with that. So if the importance was quality of paint job, great, you align the things that he does better. If the importance was speed, right, they needed it done quickly, great, we align it with that. If they needed advice, fantastic, we align with that. So creating real value actually then allowed Will to be chosen early. And that, by the way, is the absolute, it's the top of the mountain of sales, which leads to the highest profit levers, is when customers are choosing you before you even quote. We've all been
Wow.
there. We've all made that decision. We've all decided emotionally and justified rationally on people before, but that's certainly aim. And then the third thing we did from a 1% better approach was around process. So we set Will up with a really straightforward and repeatable process that he could do again and again and again when he was in front of customers. It wasn't fancy. It didn't use fancy words or sales methodologies like spin selling or something like that. But it was something he could execute consistently that would allow him to grow. Now, Will's business from those three things, he has now grown four times the size of what he was. Four times. So he's gone from having a team
Wow.
of six people. He had six people in his business 16 months ago when he joined me. He's now got 28 people in his business. Funded himself, no deep pockets behind it. In fact, he's come over from the UK to live in Australia, so it can be really hard when you're on your own. Young guy, and he's grown four times at his revenue line, and more than four times at his profit line.
I was just
So
going to go there
yeah,
and
yeah.
ask, what did his profits do?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So in fact, look, I'd probably say it's actually about four times on his profit line as well. It
Okay.
yins and yangs a little bit. And across that journey, there was moments where you do give up a bit of profit to grow. And
You
I think
bet.
that's very, very normal as long as you're only giving it up to then to get that growth and you can normalize. And he certainly has. He has certainly normalized and his profit numbers are good. They're strong. I won't say the numbers, obviously. So I've given a bit of information about him away, but certainly it's a healthy business. I'd happily have that business myself.
Uh-huh.
And I'm so proud of him because he has consistently shown up to do those small improvements each and every day. And it's made such a difference for him.
That is a really cool story. Thank you for sharing that.
My
Uh,
pleasure.
because it's not the big, flashy, shiny things that work long term, it's these small items. If he can cut down that response time by however many minutes and get more calls in the day, if he can solidify those processes, those are huge. Because all too often I work with guys who carry it all around up here in their head,
Yeah.
and their team would like to hit the target, but they don't know where the target is. Today it's here, tomorrow it's there, next week it's over here. And that makes an impossible success for your team. And so you've
Mm.
got this hurry up and wait type thing with the team. And you're leaking profits at that point. Where if we can get those processes out of somebody's head, get them documented, the team knows where the target is and how to hit it and what your expectations are. You just given them a golden key to success.
You're so right. And the speed one is so impactful. I always try and imagine myself as the customer, but let's say I'm out hunting and I try to pick something that's in the background. You have a beautiful printer there in the background. But printing isn't necessarily something that is in a growth market. But let's say you're out looking to do a home renovation and you want an interior designer, and you are jumping on the phone. Sorting through interior designers, you're going to make a few phone calls along that journey. Most people will. And you go out to three interior designers and you put inquiries out. Say you're on email, you put three inquiries out, bang, 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 they go. And a lot of people will call, but let's say they go out straight away. Three email inquiries. If one comes back to you straight away, for most people's experience, in that moment, they're engaged. They're
You bet.
excited, maybe not excited, maybe they're just curious, but they're certainly engaged to talk about interior designing at that moment. So the interior designing companies that either answer the phone or call back on that lead straight away, and the gold standard is less than 2 hours, but ideally it's instant. The businesses that call back straight away, you've got an engaged customer there and you're matching their energy versus the ones that call back 8 or 10 hours later or the next day. If it's me and putting myself in the customer's shoes, I'm on to the next thing. Or I've already spoken to the interior designer and built a relationship with someone else and appreciated that someone's called me back and they've become my person for this journey. And what would then only knock them out is poor delivery of a quote or a poor experience from there or crazy pricing, right? So it's theirs to lose. Those that respond the fastest, you are actually in the position where if you do things right from there, and it's easy to do things right in competitive industries because generally most businesses are pretty similar. They don't have a uniqueness that is so significant that they can blow people out of the water.
Right.
But when you've responded to that, you've already set yourself up to win. And I think that's a piece that I wish more sales leaders, business owners, salespeople really wrapped their head around that it's not about them. It's not about how busy they are. If they want to win more sales and they want to have a more profitable business, you've got to line up with what the customer wants. Get into their lane. Fish where the
Right.
fish are, swim next to them. So the speed one is just so impactful.
It is. And then I'm going to add another little piece to that speed part is selling in a way that's serving your customer. Because at the time that customer reaches out to you, they're either hurting, their basement's flooded, or their power's off, or their roof is leaking, or whatever it might be. They're stressed. They're hurting. They've called for a reason. They need some help. And when you can come across as with empathy, if you can come across that way and actually offer them a service that they're needing, then you're doing a great service for them. And then, like you said, do it quickly. You've really put that little cherry on top for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I speak about speed so much, even in my own podcast. I'm trying to think of what a ripping podcast. I think it was episode 185 around speed, but constantly talking about it so much so that I think if you just started there, I think you're on a winner.
I think so too. Yeah, because so many people, myself included, don't get back as fast as you should. And that makes you very vulnerable for other people to come in and steal them away on you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
So, what's another small step that somebody could take?
Oh, there's so many. It's such a great topic. We will run out of time very quickly on it. Excuse me. So if I'm talking about, and I'll try and give another example here. Worked with a landscaping business. So landscaping is very similar to a lot of home services in that it's not always compulsory. It's not like a flooded basement where you
Right.
have to have it done. It's often a nice to have, like painting, like decorating, like cleaning, like steam cleaning, for example, like having, so there's so many examples we could go through. Having your roof replaced, right, because it's getting a bit older. Lots of ideas here. But this landscaping business, again, a reasonably young guy, business was profitable, had a good team in there. And what I found with this business was that he had a really significant number of steps in his sales process. So lead would come in, he'd call the customer, he'd go out to site, he'd check out their house, he'd go back to the office or the ranch as he called it. He would complete his quote, his design, sorry. He'd go back and he'd present the design of the landscape garden. He'd then go back, he'd prepare the quote, he'd go back and present the quote. And these were decent sized deals. These were $50 to $100,000 type of projects. And there were so many touch points that A, the process elongated, but B, he was having to have too much of the customer's time.
Oh,
and
yeah.
momentum dropped from that. So what we did, and I'll simplify the example here as well, but what we did was we condensed that process so that he was able to go to site, go back to the ranch, excuse me, and then prepare the design and the quote together, get that in front of the customer. There was no emailed quotes, simply presented face to face, and went through that. And he, in the first week that he rolled that out, bang, nailed a $73,000 deal, just like that.
Wow.
And I got an email from him a couple of weeks later that said, Ben, I was struggling to fill my next month pipeline before we started. And within 6 weeks of us, he'd filled 3 months worth of his pipeline. So, and that was just by simplifying that process. But I think the two really simple versions of that is number one is to make sure that as a business you are quoting your customer when they're ready, and often that's when you're in their home. So I
Right.
really encourage businesses wherever they can to quote on the spot, because if you can quote on the spot, right, and that works for deals up to certain sizes. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
you cap out kind of $5,000 to $10,000. $10,000, I think you find you cap out on that, and it's worth a revisit. Not always. I've definitely seen businesses have lots of success quoting on the spot for bigger deals, but certainly where you've got deals under that value, quoting on the spot's really easy. And I had the same conversation with a window cleaner who came around and quoted our house, and I actually asked him. I said, "Hey, how long is this going to take?" And he said half a day. And as he was leaving, I said to him, "Is there any reason you didn't quote me on the spot?" And he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, you knew how long it was going to take, and it's mostly labor. There's not really any equipment in
Right. Yeah.
cleaning our windows. We got a
Yep.
lot of windows." Um, and he said, "I just thought it wasn't the right thing to do." And I said, "I tell you what, if you had quoted me on the spot, you probably had me then and there, because I think it was $1,000. Right? It's not something I want to muck around on. I just want to get the job done and move on." He actually rang me. He wasn't a client of mine, but he rang me 3 weeks later and said, "Oh my God, I am running on, I think it was 8 out of 10 that I'm closing on the spot just by doing that." So I wanted to ask him to do mine for free, because that had just made him so much money, but I wasn't that cheeky. So the first one is to quote on the spot. And the second one is quite simply is just put a big red cross through your process of emailing quotes.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Unless you're doing small value projects, and for most people, I say use your judgment, but a small value project is absolutely under $1,000. And it gets grey from there. But certainly by the time being you're at $5,000, I wouldn't say they're small value projects. It is if you can't make the time to get out and present that quote to your customer, then don't expect your close rates to rise, which means your marketing spend per lead is going to remain high, which means your cost per lead is high, which means your customer lifecycle value or lifetime value is a little bit lower and your profit number is lower. So take the time to get in front of your customers and present it. And sometimes that does mean structural change for a business. Sometimes that can be more than 1%. But I can sit here confidently now and say I have never, ever in my 43 years on this planet and 25 years in sales, I have never not seen a business grow sales from quoting on the spot instead of emails. Never, ever have I.
Yeah. And I would say that from the customer side of things, if you'll quote right there on the spot, more than likely I would sign up with you because you're here. I like you. I like the way you presented. You look professional on, the list can go on forever versus if you hide behind an email that I may or may not see. I have like 5 email addresses and I try to touch them all, but they don't get touched every day. I
Yeah,
do my best. But there's
yeah,
days when a couple of them don't get touched for a couple of days just because you got so much on your plate. And then by that
yeah,
time, you've lost that fever, that reason that you called. And now it's like, oh, it doesn't matter, you know, or
yeah,
somebody else has
yeah,
stepped in. One of the two.
yeah, yeah,
That cooling
yeah.
off period has happened.
Yeah, very common. Someone
Yeah.
else steps in. Actually, you mentioned the word presenting. I went out for a run this morning. So I left home at just before 6. And as I'm running out the front door, my neighbour, who owns a pool company, a pool building and heating company, as I walked out, he stopped me and he said, "Ben," and I didn't know he was listening to my podcast. By the way, we got thousands and thousands of downloads a month, and I don't know who the people are, but he said, "Ben, I've been listening to your podcast," and he said. And he smelled under his left arm and then he smelled under his right arm. And he said, "I'm even checking how I smell now before I go into meetings with customers, just to make sure I'm presenting well and leaving a good impression." And I bounced away. I ran about 10Ks this morning and I bounced away. And that had me on a high for the first 5Ks until it started raining. That just these little things, right,
Little
can make
things.
such a difference to people. And yeah, and he just picked that up from one of my episodes. So of course I asked him to leave me a 5-star rating, and away we both went into our day. But it's these small little touches that can really make the difference.
Right, yes. Even making sure you carry a clean shirt in your truck or your van.
Yeah.
Flip that clean shirt on when you walk,
Yeah.
before you hit that door of that customer's home. They don't want to see that you've got whatever down the front of you, because that takes that impression of professionalism away.
Yeah, absolutely right. Working boots, working clothes, fine. We don't want home services businesses arriving in suits,
No,
but that doesn't remove the requirement to have clean gear,
clean.
to be
Yes, yeah,
presentable. If
be
you
clean.
smoke, I mean, my biggest pet hate of trade businesses in particular is if you're a smoker, that's cool, right? That's your choice. But don't have a cigarette just before you go
Oh yeah, that's
into a
awful.
customer's home. Yeah, yeah. And in fact, when I did the cleaning of my windows, is I had two people come around, and the first guy, he was lovely, but he smelt like cigarette smoke because he just had one, and I all I wanted to do was get him out of my house
Yes.
because I didn't like the smell of it, and it's such a shame because he really was a lovely guy, but he killed the deal because he lit up just
Yeah.
before he came in when he really should have done it after, right?
After, yeah.
After he
Used to have
left,
a
yeah.
we used to have a copier repair guy that would come in my office, and he would have a cigarette before he came in, and I'm really allergic to cigarette smoke. And so he would come into my office smelling like smoke and working on my copier, which is right, you can see right there is behind me. And I'm
Yeah.
over here suffering while he's here. And finally, I had to call the copier company and say, "Can you please send somebody else? I can't handle his cigarette smoke." And they go, "What?" Yeah, he has a cigarette right before he walks in my office, and he must have the windows up in his car when he does it.
Yeah,
So,
very,
yeah, those
yeah,
things can really sour and cause you to lose a sale. People don't even
yeah.
think about it. So, small details are important. Yeah. So, I love the 1% club. I use that constantly with my coaching clients in my Profit Amplifier coaching group, because it's just amazing all these little places that we can improve 1% of what it does overall. It's huge.
I'm all in for the 1%. I even designed some merchandise for my customers. I have a academy, a sales team academy, sold out sales teams academy, and yeah, everyone who joins gets. I'm looking here on my desk. They've got socks and a hat and a t-shirt and drink bottles, and yeah, it's kind of piled up in the corner here over in my office. So, yeah, I love it too.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Well, Ben, we're coming up on the section of the program where I like to dig a little deeper. We've been giving great information up to this point, but let's go a little deeper. Would you share with our listeners a hidden or unique profit leak that you see when you've worked with some home service business owners over the years?
Okay, great. This is a question that is so hard to pick just one.
It
So,
is.
would you be okay if I gave a couple of runners up here?
You bet. I don't think the listeners are
Excellent.
going to care. You shared more than one. Oh, please,
Excellent.
no, Ben. No, only share one.
Great. Well, let's go with some runners up. So, runners up number one here is they don't put their prices up by CPI every year.
Oh,
It
that's a
is
good one.
it is the most basic change you can make to revenue that has the least heinous or the least pushback from any customers when you say prices are going up by CPI, right? 3%. And what invariably happens with a number of trade businesses and home service businesses that I work with is they don't do it for 3 years and then they realize they need to put them up 7 or 8 or 10%.
Right. And
And
then they're
then they
they're
get
afraid to do
pushback.
it. Yes.
Yeah, then they get pushback from their customers rather than 3% every year, which is the equivalent of about compounding, it's about 11 or 12% over 3 years, right? Just not doing that. So that's number one. Just put your prices up once a year. So easy to do. That's number one. Number two would be I think the biggest leak is they take too long to quote. I'm
Okay.
busy. I
Yeah.
don't have time to quote. I'll get back to you in a week. Any home service or trade business that is doing cash and carry deals, and I'd say cash and carry deals, anything up to look depending on where you live and who you are and so forth, it's anywhere between $10,000 and $20,000 average deal. So let's say up to $20,000 deal. If you're not quoting the next day, same day or next day, you're losing so much momentum. And
Right.
it's that change on its own is where I see significant increase in close rates, which what I'm essentially saying is that businesses don't need more leads, they just need to service those leads they have better. Instead of closing one in four, if you can close one in three, That's 8 percentage points more in your close rate, which is a 33% roughly, or a 30% increase in your close rate. So if you go from 1 in 4 to 1 in 3, you are growing your business by 30%, just like that. Forget 3% from your revenue growth, right? You are growing by 30%, and then whatever that translates to at a bottom line level, right? Because of course there's cost to serve
There's
and
costs and
cost to,
stuff, right? Yeah.
cost products and so forth. But whatever you're growing at a bottom line is at a higher rate than your 1 in 4 deals because you're not having to pay for more leads. So it actually
Right.
should pound for pound increase your profit level. So they're the two runners up. And in fact, I think they're both goodies on their own. The biggest one for me is that trade, home service, construction, any of these businesses, they don't go back to the well. So they have a deal with a customer, they do the
So
project,
true.
and they don't go back and talk to them about maintenance or repeat services, right? So they've put the new product in or the service in or whatever the product may be. They don't go back and put these people onto a maintenance program, right? If it's solar, you get your solar, cleaned. If it's windows, you have them. Okay, we're going to come back every 6 months. Right? I could go on and on and on. The second area is they don't go back to these customers and see if they've moved house or bought an investment property, or have some friends, right, that are in the need for
Mhm.
whatever their services are. And most businesses, when you do a good job, they're generally happy to do this. Right, so that's number two. And the third thing is they don't actually look to increase the transaction value, not gouge their customers, but increase the transaction value once they're in the middle of the project. So we'll go back to the pool example. If they're building a pool and the customer originally didn't want a pool cover or didn't want a pool heater or didn't want a higher class filtration system or didn't want some extra coping tiles, right? They don't ask that question again during the installation because often that's
Okay.
a point where, and I'm hugely guilty of it, is I'll start a project. My wife will tell everyone that I'll start a project. I've got a Land Rover Defender, an old Land Rover Defender at the moment. And as soon as I finish one part, I'm adding another part to it and I'm just making it better and better and better. And anyone that sells Land Rover Defender parts, give me a call because I'm in the market. And even though I'm only buying one, I'll keep buying more and more in that same moment. So where you can increase that transaction size, I think that as a hidden gem, that on its own, 30 to 50%, I've seen businesses grow just simply by going back to their existing databases and working on those three things. So three
Wow.
hidden gems. Choose your poison. We talk about them all the time on our podcast as well. So if you forget about them, you can just jump on and listen there.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That was amazing. You've really dropped some, I like to use the term profit bombs. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
So, Ben, how can people reach out and get a hold of you and learn more about your sales process training that you have?
Oh, great. Thank you for asking. So I believe you're going to share a link in your show notes.
We will. Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. So in there is if you're someone that's, I guess if you're a business that's not growing, you're a bit frustrated, you're working really hard and you're not seeing the money in the bank, there's a quote quiz link in there. It's free, it's quick, and it will identify through us. I check every response that goes out. It will identify where you've got an opportunity, right? So a profit bomb or a sales bomb where you've got an opportunity to make a rapid change. Super easy, super quick, free. You can jump in and do that now. So that's the first thing I'd suggest you do. If not that, I would then have a look at our podcast. So it's called Trade Sales Made Simple. We use the word trade very, very openly. It's very trade and home services, I say, is very similar. It's very much focused on these industries. So you can jump in with 230 episodes in. I'd start with started about episode 180 is where I recommend people go, or up to 230. They're short and sharp. And you can jump in and get some real value from lots of 10-minute podcasts that drop 3 times a week. So that'd be the two areas, Diane.
Very good. Thank you for sharing that. And listeners, I hope you were taking notes because, boy, he really gave you some good information today. And just want to say thank you again for joining us. I know you're busy. This is your busy season, and I'm aware of that. So thank you for joining us and being faithful to always listen to this podcast. And before I go, just want to say welcome to all the new people who found our podcast. I'm so glad you found it and that you're listening. And let us know if there's a topic that you would like us to talk about. We're happy to find guests to fill certain topics. So, with that, we're going to call this one a wrap. Again, I'm Diane Gardner, your host, and we'll catch you on our next episode. Bye for now.